committee. Firstly, can we take apologies for absence? And we have got a few.
Yeah, sure. We've got apologies from Councillor Hinchcliffe and Councillor Pandor, as well as Councillor Swift, for whom Councillor Scullion's substituting.
Thank you. So at the moment we're not quorate, but we are waiting for Councillor Firth to join us, and then we will be quorate. So we may well have to juggle some of the items around depending on when he actually turns up. So agenda item 2, declarations of interest from anybody. No, thank you. And there's nothing on the agenda today which requires the exclusion of the press or public. So item 4 is minutes of the last meeting from January 23. So has anybody got any comments or questions on the minutes? No. So can we note that we'll recommend for those to be approved, and we'll either do that when Councillor Firth joins or at a later meeting. Okay, so agenda item 5 is the internal audit progress report, and I think from my point of view, I think we're still concerned about resourcing, so I think the committee needs to keep gaining assurance that we're still on track and how we're going to deal with any areas of risk. And also, can you just give us a bit of an update on progress with the whistleblowing and fraud investigations? Thank you, Bron.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of resourcing, it's been a tale of two halves. We have lost one of our team, but we've gained a new auditor. So we're back to sort of still needing to replace 2.5 posts that remain vacant. We are working with the HR team to think about some other options. We did go to tender for some co-source support, but we didn't get any interested. We got one interested party back, but we got poor references. So we elected not to spend the money with that particular provider, and we are going to look to go out again for some further co-source support tenders, and we'll see if that makes any difference. We're also looking at, there's a new supplier that the Combined Authority is using for temporary and permanent recruitment, and we're working really closely with their consultants to try and find some potential bodies. We're also really seriously thinking about bringing forward an aspect of our organisational design work that we're going to be doing this next year, to consider bringing an apprentice in. We just have to balance that against the resource it takes to get them to a position where, you know, we're not actually compromising our delivery further in trying to bring that kind of new resource in. But we're thinking particularly of doing that on the counter-fraud side, where you've seen over the course of this last year as a committee the increase in the number of referrals. And it is an area that we continue to need to provide more advice to the business on, so that they're on the front foot of doing their fraud risk assessments, etc. So we think that could be potentially a good way to bring an apprentice in, that we could put them through. The IIA now have a counter-fraud apprenticeship programme, but we could also give them some internal audit experience as well, so hopefully have them as a resource across the board. On the progress against the fraud and whistleblowing complaints, we've closed one, where the provider was able to send some additional evidence through to our economic team, who had raised the issue with us initially, and working with them, we've agreed that there is no fraud to investigate any further. There's another case that's very similar that we're hoping will be resolved in the same way, and we're just waiting for the feedback from the supplier on the additional evidence. That's 2 cases that potentially haven't identified any fraud but have been investigated, and we'll be able to close those, hopefully the second one in the very near future. The others are slightly more difficult. One internal one that is an ongoing investigation at the moment, also linked to some audit work that we're doing, that we are bringing to a conclusion at the moment, and we will report back as soon as we have an outcome on that. And then the 2 whistleblowing complaints, one is being dealt with by one of our local authority colleagues or partnerships. We're still waiting for them to come back to us on the outcome of their investigation. So when we have that, we'll report that to this committee in terms of whether there was any fraud or wasn't. That has been escalated internally because we're just a bit concerned that it's taking quite a long time to get to the point of having that report. And then the other final whistleblowing complaint, we've brought some outside resource in to help us look at that. So we've managed to procure some assistance, and we're hoping to finish the majority of that work before the end of March. So they're progressing quite well, but as with all these things, and I'm sure everyone around the table will be aware, as soon as you start looking at fraud investigations or whistleblowing referrals, it grows like topsy in terms of what you additionally need to consider. And that's partly why we're also doing some audit work on the internal fraud referral. So that sort of takes us to where we are with the counter fraud and the fraud stuff. In terms of the plan more generally, we do have a lot of reports now out in draft. We're waiting for management responses. Again, a bit of a mixed bag coming through in terms of the assurance ratings. They're not all reasonable, so the committee can expect to see some slight variation across that, but we're working very hard with management to make sure that they address the recommendations in a way that gives us assurance that those risks are mitigated adequately. So that's the emphasis on those and why they take a little bit longer to resolve. On that note, we did promise the committee an update on the minimal assurance report that came in January. You will have noted from the paper, I'm sure, that we've gone through all of the recommendations that were made against that report, and we are confident that good progress, timely progress, is being made against those. They are, however, very interconnected. And we were hoping to be able to come back and say, this many are done, this many are still in progress, and this many are going to have a longer lead-in time. But it's not as simple as that, because a lot of the recommendations rely on closing the loop on a number of other ones, and it's a bit of an all or nothing, I think, with that one. And we did, as we pointed out in the paper, put a follow-up review on the plan for this next year. So we will look at it again in the round to make sure that the actions that have been taken actually address the risks and the concerns. But good progress is being made, and I am confident that actually it's been taken very seriously and it is being dealt with in the most appropriate way it could be. And we are looking for some very supportive work from partner Deloitte's on looking at systems review. So it's become quite a big piece of work to address. I'm sure there'll be nods around the table to say that is the case. But yeah, you can take our assurance that we're content that those are progressing as they should be. And then for the rest of it, I'm very happy to take questions on the progress update, if anybody's got anything they want to raise.
If I may. So you mentioned the possibility of getting an apprentice in. I think you mentioned that the last meeting as well. Have you got a timeline for that decision at all?
Not. There's nothing we specifically have to do by a particular point. It's much more a case of we'd prefer to be in a steadier state in terms of the BAU work before we bring an apprentice in, just to make sure that we don't derail the good progress we're making against the plan now. And I think it will just be a case of us getting through the rest of the current year's plan, looking at what we're doing next year and trying to make sure that at the beginning of the year, it's always easier to find a range of reviews that are more simple to put with somebody who's new to the role. We're at the point now where the reviews we're doing are the slightly more difficult, more strategic reviews. So I think if we can put this year's plan to bed, which we're confident still that we will do, and look at the 23-24 plan, bring an apprentice in at that point, and make sure that we're not derailing the BAU. But there's no deadline for us to do that. It's more a case of making sure the budgets are in place, making sure that we've agreed the establishment figures, etc., which we were going to do as part of an OD in 23-24 anyway.
Okay, thank you. And the other thing that crossed my mind is I think we've seen in the past that your team get quite involved in providing guidance on new processes and systems to almost engineer out any risks around them. how much of that sort of work is sort of absorbing time that could be otherwise spent on doing audit work?
Less than previously. So we did, certainly in the initial stages, when I came in as head of audit, we were doing a lot more advice and guidance work. I'd say there's a lot less of that now. I think one of the areas that we do need to critically look at this next year is the grant certifications. They come in a little bit out of left field sometimes, and we're looking at, with Angela and the finance team, how we can collectively manage that better, so that, because that does derail the BAU. If you get a grant dropping at the last minute that needs certifying by the head of audit in 3 days, it stops all the other work, and it's never 3 days worth of work. It's a good week or a 2-week process. So I think that's an area that we really do need to consider. So on the advice and guidance bit, we're probably not doing enough on the counter fraud stuff, is what I would say, because I think that's the bit where you want to be doing the preventative work rather than the investigations further down the line. So, but yeah, it's that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on that paper? No? Thank you. So if we can just note that's been considered, please. Can we go back? We've just been joined by Councillor Firth, so could we go back to the minutes, please? Minutes of the last meeting. We needed to be quorate to approve those, so we are quorate now. So did you have any comments or concerns, questions?
No, thank you, Chair.
No, thank you. So could we all agree to accept those minutes? Lovely, thank you very much. Okay, so we'll move on to agenda item 6, and that's for members to approve the internal audit plan. I thought there was a very useful list along with this detailing the rationale behind the audits, which was very helpful, thank you. And I don't think there have been any changes to the paper since it was last presented to the committee, but Bron, again, could you just take us through that, please?
Just 2 small changes to the plan, and it was an addition of 2 pieces of work following the discussions with the directors and the internal leadership board. We were asked to consider a rolling programme of reviews around business planning and finance processes, because there's a genuine desire to ensure those are better linked and embedded in the organisation, in terms of making sure that, you know, the business plans are properly supported by good financial controls and management. And we completely applaud that and think it is a very sensible thing to build into the plan. So we're going to make sure that we do that. It will be a case, I think, this year of waiting till later in the year to give it some time to bed in and consider how those controls are working. But it's definitely one we agreed as an audit function it was worth adding to the plan, which I hope the committee will support. And then another piece of work, not a big piece of work, but one around, there's a lot of strategic development going on around open data, but there is a desire to be sure that before we take that any further forward, we have an opportunity to just do some assurance around the quality of the processes around that. So again, we thought it could be hugely problematic for the organisation reputationally if we don't do something that just says, yeah, we're confident that the data that's going out there the quality is adequate. So it was only those 2 additions, and then the rest is as the committee saw the plan in January. No further additions or removals.
Okay, thank you. Any questions?
Seems eminently sensible.
Yep, lovely, thank you. So can I ask members, are we all content to approve the plan? Yep, lovely, thank you. Okay, so moving on to agenda item 7, which is to approve the annual accounts. I think we've seen the draft accounts already. There have been some minor changes, but I believe there's nothing material. And I think there's a bit of work still to do, but if I could ask one of the marks to talk us through that. Oh, Angela? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As you said, we've brought these we brought the accounts in October, recognising the sort of pause in the timing of the audit, which had been pre-agreed at the start of the year. So as always, when auditors come in, there are always some bits of changes. There's nothing material. The auditor's report sets out some of the unadjusted misstatements and any points they wish to draw to your attention, and the marks will, I'm sure, talk you through that. From my perspective, the accounts present the necessary information. It's worth noting this is the first set of consolidated accounts with West Yorkshire Police, which has been a bit of a technical challenge bringing them together. Police is not the same as a combined authority, and putting them in one set of accounts brings its challenges with it. But we're comfortable with the accounts that are presented here. As you say, you saw those in October for any other comments. So you will have received, separate to the paper on this agenda, we've sent the appendices out on Friday, so you have a separate paper which has both the auditor's completion report, or almost completion report, and the latest version of the account. But as you said, that we haven't changed anything fundamental in there. The results for the year, as reported way back last June, remain the same. And throughout all the many pages of the accounts and the technical need to present figures in a certain way, that there is one page that shows sort of the reserves movements, and the results for the year remain unaffected by all the work that's happened. And so we're happy with them as they are presented. Probably worth the auditors explaining their completion, the issues in their completion report for you, in order to help you shape your view as to whether you're comfortable with the accounts as presented today.
Thank you, Angela. So, Mark?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Angela. So this is our completion report, and it provides a summary of our conclusions from our audit of the Combined Authority's financial statements for 21-22, and also provides the committee with an update on our value for money work. We will take the report as read, Chair, but we would like to spend just a couple of minutes highlighting the key messages, as Angela's alluded to. So I'll briefly introduce the report and the headlines, and then Mark will touch on some of the details, providing an update on the status of the audit, those bits that are outstanding, and our main findings. So in terms of headlines, and as detailed on page 5 of our report, which is also page 5 of your supplementary pack, the committee will no doubt be pleased to know that we are proposing to issue a clean, unqualified opinion on those financial statements. So a positive outcome in that regard. The accounts that were presented for audit were of a good quality. We've only identified one minor control recommendation, and few and relatively minor amendments have arisen through the audit process, and Mark will say just a little bit more about those in just a second. In relation to our value for money work, consistent with the extension granted to us by the National Audit Office, we have got an additional 3 months in which to report our work, our value for money work, and we will be taking advantage of some of that 3 months. So we're not reporting at this stage our value for money work. I would, however, just draw the committee's attention to section 7 of the audit completion report, which is page 26 of your pack. The key bit there being that we have not today identified any significant weaknesses that we are proposing to report. So again, a positive indication, but please be patient and bear with us for the full report. I'll hand over to Mark, as I say. Before I do so, I'd like to thank the finance team. Probably also worth me just giving you a little bit of additional context as a committee as well. I see 15 of these audit completion reports, and just to give you a flavour, this is actually a really good one. So I hope that that gives you as a committee some assurance, and also is pleasing to management as well. So over to Mark for just a little bit more detail.
Thanks, Mark.
Mark.
Thank you, and thank you for that introduction. You've touched on some of the things that I'd picked up in reading this. I actually want to also congratulate the finance team really on this. It is an unqualified opinion, and it's also group accounts for the first time. You're sort of tentatively going towards this extraordinary merger, and I think well done everybody. And reading the significant risks and significant findings, there are no matters to report really, and I was amused rather than alarmed or triggered by the third of the unadjusted misstatements, which clearly was an allocation to a different year and not a prepayment, which is perfectly understandable. And I especially enjoyed, as far as you can enjoy, reading an audit report. I think it was on page 24, references to typos and things like that. It felt as though you were looking for things at that point to bring up. But I thought overall, actually, that is actually, as you say, it's a very positive audit report. And I think taking that as the external auditor and taking the detailed work that internal audit do and that we pour over actually gives me a degree of confidence and assurance, really, that we need for these times going forward. Really, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Anybody else got any questions?
No questions, just that I agree entirely with what Councillor Scullion had to say.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd endorse that too. I think it's been a really positive outcome. So again, thanks to everybody involved. Can I just ask one question, just for the benefit of this committee, where you do find misstatements, how do you gain assurance, or the level of assurance necessary to come back to this committee and say you don't think there's an issue there?
Yeah, happy to take that one, Chair. And I think the extrapolated errors are actually a really good example of that. So we found what is a relatively small error in our sample. So we had two choices, one of which was to test the whole population and be able to give management and ourselves the assurance we were looking for in relation to that whole population. The other was to, as we've done, say, well, that error might replicate itself across the whole population and we need to report that to this committee. And that's exactly what we've done. And I think in doing so, it probably gives you the assurance of the robustness of the audit process and the openness and transparency.
Lovely, thank you. That's reassuring. Good. So if there are no further questions, can I just ask if the committee approves in principle the annual accounts subject to this further work not actually showing anything material? Yep.
Sorry, Chair, if I could just be really clear. Once we have finished our work, we will issue a communication to this committee just confirming we've completed and also providing you just with a brief summary of the work and any findings from the 3 or 4 areas that do remain outstanding. If I'm honest, you'll probably receive that on exactly the same day as you receive our opinion as well, but we will certainly follow those issues up and report back to this committee.
Lovely, thank you. So on that basis, are we happy to approve? Yeah, lovely, thank you very much. Okay, so agenda item 8, and that's to advise revisions on the Code of Corporate Governance. I think it's a very thorough document and particularly relevant to the work of this committee, and it actually feeds into the final item, which is agenda item 12. So I think that the code will be reviewed again. I believe it's a bit of a holding position, and it'll be reviewed again once the organisational changes have been implemented, because those will require changes to accountabilities and responsibilities to be reflected in this code. So I think, as I say, it's very much a holding position, and I think it's suggested that once this work has been done, we'll have another look at the code. And I'm assured that during the changes in the organisation that there are no risks presented to the way things are going to be governed and followed through. So Melanie, I think who's going to? That's Katie. Are you going to take us through this, please?
Thank you, Chair. as you say, this is a very succinct report. It's as you say, a holding position, proposing that we carry out the remainder of the organisational evolution work before actually reviewing the code. We're hoping that that will be towards the end of the summer this year, at which point we'll bring this back to the committee for further review and discussion. But yeah, happy to take any questions on the document as it stands.
Thank you. Councillor Scullion.
Can some really kind person tell me what organisational evolution work is?
Good question.
Can I defer to Melanie on that one?
Yeah, sure. It's organisational development, and it's also looking at our ways of working, process improvement, systems improvement. So it's our internal change programme, and we've called it our evolution programme.
Chair, I entirely understand the principles, and actually in some ways what we do in our particular local authority is that we have done away with lengthy sheets of outcomes and so on. Well, we haven't, they said underneath the vision for the council, and we have, a bit like John Lewis in the old days, we have 5 distinctive words as part of our vision for 2024 initially. So I'm entirely happy with the principle. When I read the paper, I thought, blimey, this is lengthy and could really do with more short-term versions of these, because if in some ways this is an underlying principle which drives the work and gives people a sense of all of the things that are doing the combined authority will work towards these ends, that vision. It has to be something that is shorter and sharper and people can get their heads and their tongues around, really. So a slightly tongue-in-cheek question, but maybe this is work in progress and it will develop further.
Yes, it is work in progress, and we will look at that. Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Can I just ask when we're likely to see the revised versions of these?
I believe we're working to the end of summer, so is that September or October?
So can we make a note that we would like to see that back if possible at that meeting? Thank you. Anything else on that paper? So is the committee happy to endorse the approach and the timeline for that? Yeah, thank you. Okay. Agenda item 9 is to receive an update on Treasury management activities. So is it Angela to take us through that, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, you have asked for a separate item on Treasury management, and it picked up the theme of the previous item. It's a bit of a work in progress, primarily because of the timing of changes coming in terms of the requirements of the SIPFA codes of practice that come into force shortly. So covered at the beginning of this, the usual assurance that we continue to have the Treasury overview with our partners who support us in doing this, and there are no current issues of concern. We continue to carry high levels of cash balances, but they're all being appropriately placed with approved counterparties. The Treasury Management Statement of Strategy you saw at your last meeting, and that then went forward to Command Authority in February and was approved as part of the budget papers. And we are continuing to work on the indicators and information that you will be required to consider as part of fulfilling your responsibilities in terms of Treasury management. The appendix here is a little dry, and it's tables of numbers, and I think we need to look at how we can present it hopefully more pictorially. I think graphs, something that hopefully is a bit more meaningful, but accompanied also by training. I think there is no point in bringing you indicators and then saying, ta-da, here they are. And I know we've done training sessions before talking through with our Treasury advisors on the sorts of things you should be monitoring, the sorts of things you should be watching out for, and then how hopefully the indicators that we provide can give you an easy way of seeing that works. So fully accept at the moment, we will not just be bringing you a table of numbers on a page that you'll look and think, what's that telling us? But I think just a bit of assurance that we are starting to pull this together with our colleagues at Leeds who provide our Treasury management support. And for the next meeting, we should have turned this into a bit more of a pack, and we'll look with you, Chair, at the appropriate time for some training for members, probably after the summer annual meeting, and we've got confirmed membership of this committee going forward, and look to put that regular training that you have in place but tied in with this. So you will see this again coming forward at your future meetings. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you just talk me through the liability benchmark? Because to me that seems to be quite a key element of this.
Yeah, this is one of the more interesting features of this report, I have to say, Chair. Essentially, what it's showing, if I can just scroll down, what this is essentially showing is the kind of the gap between what our capital requirements are and what our borrowing is going to be. And you've got the red dotted line and then the blue line underneath that. And the closer those two lines are, the less headway we have. So what this is demonstrating is around 26, 27, 28, that's going to be the real pressure point at this point in time in terms of the forecasts. So it's just a good visual representation of showing where the pressure point will be. So I hope that explains.
Thank you. And how often is that monitored?
We monitor it on an ongoing basis. So in conjunction with our Treasury advisors at Leeds, we have regular meetings with them, and they provide us with a monthly pack. So we're monitoring that quite regularly.
Okay, thank you. Anybody got any questions? No? Can I just one point of clarification, 2.7, it talks about borrowing, and it says that borrowing will increase but not from external funds. So I think this committee's talked before about using internal money rather than borrowing. Is that what it's referring to here? Yeah. And will this committee be kept informed of the level of money or this quantum of money used in that sort of way?
Yes, I think we need to look at how, when we monitor our capital financing requirement, it does show that use of internal resources. Again, it's quite a lengthy document, lots of numbers in it. I think we need to find a way to extract that sort of information for you so you can see the bits that interest you. But it does show what we expect our use of reserves and cash balances to be before we go into external borrowing. So we'll look at that as part of the pack we bring you back.
Thank you. I think if you could, because obviously that's quite a big risk when you start to draw on internal money to support capital projects, isn't it? So I think this committee needs to be clear on that. Yeah, lovely, thank you. Okay, so no more questions. We'll move on to agenda item 10, and that's to consider any changes to the arrangements for internal control. And also to receive an update on financial pressures for the coming year. So is that back to you, Angela?
It is back to me, yes, thank you. Not much different to report than previously. So covering off internal controls, there haven't been any significant changes. We are still in the process of doing the final testing for our new integrated finance HR payroll system. And there is a close focus on controls, and I've mentioned there the project board includes myself, head of finance and head of internal audit, so we have the right pairs of eyes thinking about what those controls need to be. There's nothing else coming through of concern from regulatory compliance board, and all the key indicators are okay at this stage. The Q3 financial update, when the Combined Authority got the revised outturn at the February meeting, broadly balanced. There are some non-recurring savings, and there were proposals there to set those aside to support the budget pressures coming up, particularly on bus-tended services, and also on inflation and capital programmes. So we've continued the budget monitoring since then. There's been a little shift since then, but nothing significant. We'll keep monitoring, and clearly we're now planning for close down during April, and we'll be able to report back in the early summer on those figures. Capital programme updates included in there for information. A significant amount of spend expected in Q4, not always the case. There's often lots of accruals being pushed through at the end of March. But there are a lot of programmes out in delivery now, and certainly the graph looking at the capital programme over the coming years, and it ties back to the borrowing that we saw before. The capital programme is increasing, currently funded by grant, but it ultimately will shift towards borrowing as we move into the part of the transport fund that requires borrowing, and potentially gain share funded projects that will be funded through using the gain share to repay borrowing costs. So this all does start to come together, but at the moment nothing of concern to report. But happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So you are confident that the funds will be expended during this final quarter as predicted?
We are dependent, particularly on the capital, we are dependent on our partners' performance as well. We have had assurances these figures are a combination of forecasts for our projects we are managing and for the projects our local authority partners are managing. The proof will be when the final returns come in April. So we'll let you know. I hesitate to say confident. I think there is always a risk that people hope to achieve more than they may. People hope, but we should get a good level of spend through. Lots of these projects are actually in delivery, so I think there might be something around the margins, but we should get a decent level of capital spend and be well set up for next year.
Lovely, thank you. Any questions? No? Okay, thank you. So, agenda item 11, and that's the risk management strategy. Who's going to take us through that? Is that James? Yeah, thank you, James.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So the corporate risk management strategy has been in place since January 2020, and I think at the last meeting of this committee, it was flagged that that needed to be reviewed to ensure it's still fit for purpose. So we're looking today to get your input to that review, and tied in with some of the discussion we've already had today in relation to the change to the organisation's operating model through the evolution programme. Obviously that has been a major shift in the structure of the organisation and the senior management, and we need to make sure that the risk management strategy is up to date and corresponds with that. In paragraph from paragraph 2.4 to 6, we've got a number of sort of summary areas that we're looking to amend. First of all, to make sure that we are all our risk management processes are very much aligned with the delivery of those outcomes as outlined in the business plan and the forthcoming corporate plan. Secondly, in some respects, a simpler, very active discussion-led approach to risk. We currently have a very, what I would term as a sort of very heavily process-led approach to risk with very lengthy and detailed risk registers. I'm not for 1 minute saying that is wrong, but it doesn't lend itself to regular conversations amongst officers around mitigations and management. It becomes a very laborious process, and I think to an extent that is preventing us from having those regular conversations that we need to be having. And also a differentiated approach to risk management at the different levels of the organisation, so that in the table there in 2.6 I've given some examples of the different sort of managerial levels, and are the different levels really focusing on the big picture risks that they ought to be. So are we getting senior directors, like some of those represented in the room here, focused on the really macro long-term existential sort of risks? And so there's a suggestion there of how we might differentiate the management of risk at different levels of the organisation. So it is a very short report, but we're looking to get some input from yourselves today to reflect that into the a potentially revamped risk management strategy, which I'm assuming we would need to bring here for sign off at a later date.
Thank you. Well, I for one, I thought it was a really good approach. I like the approach. It sort of made a lot of sense, and I thought it would probably give far better focus on the vital few risks, so to speak. So I thought that was really good. I'd certainly endorse that from my point of view. And I personally think the key thing to success will be developing a common understanding of what risk is and the tolerance levels and things like that. And maybe, you know, setting some common standards across the organisation just to support it. But yes, I think personally think it's a very good approach. Any other members got any other comments on it?
Thank you, Chair. No, I agree. I think it's a very common sense approach. Just out of interest, and apologies I wasn't at the last meeting when it was discussed, at a strategic level in relation to risk management, have you looked at sort of benchmarking where the organisation is on the IIA's risk maturity model, sort of establishing where you are and where you want to get to and how you could get there?
I'm afraid I would have to defer to more senior colleagues to answer that question.
Yeah, if I could come back in on that one. We have looked at maturity mapping, but we haven't necessarily looked at that one. So yeah, so we have used a model previously, and we have put in place some of the actions that we'd like to get to where we want to get to. I think as well, as part of the organisational evolution, we want to see risk management given a higher priority within the structures of the organisation, but also addressed through the ways of working. So there's a couple of work streams where we really want to focus on risk, and we're looking at culture change as well. And traditionally we've been more risk averse, and we want to look at how we can be more agile in decision making, but balance out the risk and understand the risk and manage that. So we will look at that, and we will continue to look at a way of identifying where we are now and the level of maturity of where we want to get to. So we will do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I just ask you to expand on what you just said about how you're going to ensure the culture supports this?
Yes, and so one of our work streams for the evolution programme is culture, and it will take a long time to change the culture of the organisation, but we're currently looking at short-term things that we can put in place to start to change the culture, and we're also looking at longer-term activities that we can put in place as well. And actually the way we approach risk and decision-making is one of the things where we need to look at that culture. And actually the staff survey that we have done on an annual basis, one of the areas where staff have more uncertainty is around some of the decision making. So it is a priority for us to look at how do we make that clearer, how do we balance it with the risk, and how do we take that forward. So we could certainly bring some of the thinking on that to a future meeting so that you can see some of the detail.
Thank you. I think that would be useful if committee members do too. Yeah, I'm thinking as well about having, if you're looking at culture, about having a cultural environment where people aren't afraid to say when things aren't going right.
Yeah.
So I'd be interested in that sort of element of it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Firth.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask, actually, further to that point, what sort of role does risk or whistleblowing or anything to do with reporting certain issues form part of any of the staff survey at the moment? As it's something that's been quite central to where we've been scrutinising it in Leeds from my own authority, and just in terms of how they feel their availability to do that.
Yeah, we don't actually have a question that's directly related to whistleblowing, but we do have whistleblowing within the organisation, and we do publicise that. So they are kept slightly different, but we do expect people to come forward, and we have some cases that we are currently investigating.
Do you want to follow up on that, or is that okay? Yeah, thank you. It may well be worth considering putting a question in around that. So yeah. Thank you. Okay, so if there's no further questions, we'll move on to the final agenda item, which is the Governance and Audit Committee Forward Plan. So this item is to approve the forward plan and also to allow members to suggest any areas for inclusion, and that would be really as a result of the workshop that we held last time, because the committee did come up with quite a few ideas on things it would like to see as a regular item for the committee to consider. So Bron, are you going to just talk us through this briefly, please?
Thank you, Chair. So it was a very productive workshop session. I think we had a lot of conversation and debate, which was really helpful. Honing it down now into the specific items for inclusion into the forward plan, I think it's a matter of trying to timetable things, and I think we've already got one item, the Code of Corporate Governance, which looks like a September-October item on the plan, and then whether we want to try and timetable some of the other areas that we thought would be helpful, but thinking about that in relation to the evolution programme particularly. So things like the assurance and accountability framework, that may well benefit from a slightly longer term input on the forward plan, because otherwise I think we'll be just having the same discussion we had in the workshop and potentially not really having the benefit of the outcomes from the evolution programme. There was also from the workshop a desire to understand a bit more about some of the key projects and some of the big delivery areas in the various directorates, which are now very much outcome focused, and whether there's an opportunity to put those maybe on a rolling programme on the forward plan going forward, asking the various directors to come forward and just talk about some of their most significant projects, what the risks might be around that and what they're doing to manage those. So I think it's really a matter of what would the committee like to see and when. As I said, I think the Code of Corporate Governance is almost a foregone conclusion given our earlier conversation, but for the others, are there particular areas of delivery that the committee would like to see prioritised?
Thank you. Can I open the floor for suggestions? Councillor Scullion.
Thank you. I like very much the idea coming out from that workshop of being able to have a rolling programme in terms of the directors of the big spend programmes, really, in terms of giving this committee an understanding of what the challenges are in terms of those programmes. I don't mean telling us precisely how many bus stops we own or things like that, but just setting the landscape at that strategic level in terms of this is what we're operating in. And I think that helps to enhance and enrich our focus here in this committee and some of the detail. You know, this is the landscape that you're working in terms of looking at governance and audit. These are the kind of outcomes, if I'm allowed to say that anymore, these are the kind of outcomes or missions that it's intended to achieve. So I like very much the idea of having a rolling program. It's not too onerous either for the directors who've got jobs to do and for this committee, but select that, you know, a few times a year, having some background like that. And of course the Code of Corporate Governance is already discussed.
Thank you. Any other ideas? Comments? No? I'd quite like to see the dashboard. I'd like to see that developed. I think you could probably incorporate a lot of information into a relatively small and succinct image, if you like, of what's happening. And for me, I'd like it to enable this committee to have assurance that the governance systems are working. So indicators around that. I've had a few ideas which I can share with you if it would help. So I'd really like to see that. I'd like to see a periodic audit of the governance systems. I know audit is stretched, but even if it's an annual one, again, just to give us assurance that the governance systems are working. Yeah, so those are my key things, I think. And I don't know if we need to timetable it, but I would like to see a discussion for this committee with the auditors as well at some point. And maybe if we could plan that in to us, you know, the most appropriate period during the year, that would be useful.
The other bit that came out of the workshop was the issue around training, and I think we've already pegged some treasury management training as a priority. But I know Councillor Scullion, you'd mentioned some skills audits that have been done in Calderdale that sounded like an interesting approach. That could be something that we just do again on a rolling programme, just try and prioritise the most pertinent updates and training needs the committee identifies. So if I can suggest we start with the treasury management and then from there roll it into whatever seems most pertinent next.
That would be good, thank you. And I think alongside that would be the governance self-review as well. I think I've considered that part and parcel of this. Councillor Scullion.
Thank you. I just wanted to say what we've done in Calderdale as the audit committee. We each filled in a not very onerous questionnaire in which we reflected on areas where we did feel we could do some more development. Little bit about relevant skills that we were bringing to our backgrounds, knowledge and experience and skills that we were bringing to the audit committee. And it was a pretty wide-ranging list, actually, the report. And it was done by our training and development officer anonymously. And the report appeared in the last audit papers. And that was really quite useful, really, I think, for us as an audit committee, and background for the officers, you know, of why people were particularly interested in those things. We've got one member and one of our non-exec independent members, both have an accountants by profession, so they bring very different perspectives to the audit committee. But everybody actually brought a different richness really to the process. So that was quite a useful, interesting discussion that we had, and I commend it really. Thank you.
Thank you, I think that's a good idea.
I'll reach out to Calderdale's Training and Development Officer and see if we can just have a look at the documentation, and that sounds like a really helpful way forward.
We do have an interim at the moment because our chief auditor has taken a retirement, so same problems as everybody else. Thank you.
Lovely. Any other contributions on this item? No, so Bron, will you be bringing us a revised schedule?
I'll work with Ben and the governance team and we'll bring the forward plan to the next meeting. I assume that's the usual. Ben's nodding, so I'll work with Ben to do that, yes.
That's lovely, thanks very much. Okay, well, I think that brings us to the end of this meeting, so thank you all for your time.